So we wanted to just address the Faculty Accessibility Fellows Program, kind of introduce it, answer questions about it. Michael Chanis is here, who's a current Accessibility Fellow, so he can chime in as to his experiences as well. But I'm just going to share the Faculty Accessibility Fellow Program webpage here on campus. And this was an initiative started really 4 years ago now to work with faculty in understanding digital accessibility and what's involved, and to help them have the time to understand how to create digital content and improve their materials that they use for courses, and to be that sort of percolation of information to the rest of the campus, to their colleagues, either within their department or within their school. And we are in the process of collecting applications now. I realize it says due May 20th. We'll still accept applications for the next little bit. We've changed the application schedule this year to better fit with course scheduling, because the goal of the fellows program is that we'll have a fellow ideally from each of the 4 schools and colleges, and we'll meet regularly with the coordinator. And the one thing about the fellows program that's a little different is that it runs on a calendar year. And so it's going to run, this next cohort of faculty accessibility fellows will be from January 2023 to December 2023. And the way we've structured it and the way we've set it up is that the first semester, that spring semester of spring 2023, it will really be working with the fellows and getting them the tools to understand digital accessibility, addressing specific concerns that they might have or that they might want to learn about, with the goal then that they can start creating content for whatever course they propose doing through the summer, so that then in the fall of 2023, they're running a course with significant improvement in accessible content. And so that's why it's operating on a calendar year, not the academic year. We asked to move up the application deadline so that we select our fellows in the summer, so that the department chairs can plan to provide that fellow with release time during the spring 23 semester, if it works out that way. Otherwise, it's one course load of extra service, but it's been our experience that if we can get that release time worked in, it's better for the fellows. It gives them time to really work on going through these components and starting to develop their accessible content. We also ask the fellows to give a couple professional development sessions, usually through CELT, on their experiences and things that they've learned. We've asked fellows to meet with their colleagues and maybe departments within their school or programs to share information they've learned, pass along information, make others aware of just accessible content. And then within this page, as well as a couple other places, are the list of who have been fellows in the past that you can reach out to should questions arise. All right, so that's really the key things about the program that I wanted to address. Michael had to step away for just a moment, but I'm happy to answer questions about the fellows program, what's involved, if you've got specific questions or whatever. And I don't hear any. I would have Michael share his experiences if he gets back, but really the goal of this was to do some recruiting, as well as to give folks a venue to maybe pose those questions to people that have been through the fellows program.
Well, right now, I don't think I could take anything else on, but it would be fun to have a chance to learn something new. That would be an important. Thanks.
And time is definitely understandable, which is one of the reasons that they worked release time in through the provost office. We've been running the program each year. I believe we'll continue to do it at least for the foreseeable future. And so, one part of it, Anne, you might look at is the potential of putting an application in next year that would be for the 2024 calendar year. I can't guarantee that they're going to run it in the 2024, but it's been a pretty successful program. We're seeing successes from it. There's lots of things that have grown out of the fellows program. And so, you can have it on your radar to think about down the road, and keeping in mind that you would have that release time as a possible option.
Sorry, I was distracted trying to multitask. How much release time?
One course in that academic year. And so usually it's a course release during the spring semester, where you would then be, meeting on a regular basis with the other fellows and doing trainings on digital accessible content. A lot of that happens early at the January winter breakouts, but then there's more specific things that then the fellows will work on during that spring semester to get them in a position to be creating accessible content for their class or classes in the fall semester.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. You're welcome. And I'm not sure that Michael's going to get back, so I think
I'm back. Sorry about that.
Oh, no, that's okay. Mike, no worry. Do you want to just briefly share what your experience has been this year in the fellows program?
Sure. I don't. Sorry, Casey, I missed a lot of what you said because of my children.
No, that's fine. I just a quick refresher for you. I basically laid out the general information that's on the fellows program site and answered briefly a question of Anne's in terms of timing. But I think just as part of the recording and such, just to share what your experience has been as a more recent fellow, because things have refined since the very first year when I was a fellow.
Yeah, I would just say that my experiences have been great in getting to network with the people at SUNY Oswego who know much more about accessibility than I do and who are just interested in broadening their skill set, centering around accessibility. The only thing I'll say is, there's only 2 visitors here, right? And Tom and I were the only 2 accessibility fellows this semester, so it has been a little lonely. I don't mean to put too much emotional attachment in it, but I would like to see the cohort be larger, or I would like to contribute to the cohort being larger, or getting more people focused on accessibility. And I guess it's strange to me even that a fellowship wouldn't or the attempt to be a fellow at the college would go overlooked, or perhaps overlooked or unnoticed by so many people. There's a wealth of information. Casey is, if you're the equation minded or the equation based kind of instructor, Casey has put an incredible amount of time of his own personal time into learning these different systems. I kind of float in the different realm of universal design for learning, as well as digital accessibility in the form of PDF. And I agree. I did hear Casey say you just shouldn't use PDFs if you can't. And he's right. But I just can't let go. and because I can't let go, that means I have to learn more. if I'm stuck in my ways in terms of what I'm using, then that means I have to learn how to make it accessible to a much larger audience.
Yeah, sorry, maybe you and I were trained the same way, that portable document format means just that if you really want to preserve and move from place to place and post and print and all of that, that was supposed to be the overriding output.
Yeah, my background is in religion and religious studies, and so my professors just couldn't wait to have those sacred documents, like have those sacred texts that they could play with in class in a PDF format or in a printed off format. I don't know what they're doing nowadays with the art scroll and the Arabic configurations, but religious studies has its own issues that they need to overcome.
Yeah, I am hesitant to make everything dependent on actually being logged in, and something that you can't have on your local computer or print out on a piece of paper. So,
and at least for me, Anne, a large part of it is also keeping costs down, because none of my classes cost over $50 for students. And my large format class, I think I have down to $20 or $25, depending on if they get the book first or second hand. I probably wouldn't be able to do that, or I would have to invest a lot of time in open source materials and change the syllabus dramatically. But I probably wouldn't be able to do that as effectively without the usage of PDF.
All right. So, if you have questions or additional questions about the fellows program, reach out to myself, to any of the other fellows. We can put you in touch with other fellows, maybe in your area, if you weren't aware. But that's what was our goal today, is share the information about the fellows program, give you some insights about it, and try and generate interest in being a fellow either in this coming year of 2023 or the year after 2024, assuming the program
we don't
continues.
All right. Well, thanks. I have concerns about transforming what were scans of handwritten transparencies into the modern era, though I still feel that gives a personal touch to things. But I also dream of having an interactive lab manual that would be web-based somehow. So these would be all tools and skills I would need to learn to develop such a thing. So,
Casey, maybe you're better. Maybe you know more, but it's really John who knows about all those tools of hypothesis and all these other like in format writing tools. I've never really learned about them yet, though.
I mean, there's a huge number of potential ways to go. And the simple fact of the matter is, and I alluded to this in the earlier session when we introduced accessibility, is that it can get very deep and very complicated in a hurry. And for the majority of us, it's really easy to do some simple things that have a big impact without a whole lot of effort on our part. But we all recognize that then there are other types of content, there are other types of information or presentations we wish to use that do require us to dig a little bit deeper. And in reality, that's one of the things that the fellows can do. My year as fellow was really spent dealing with math notation. I'd hoped to deal with some chemical notation as well. The short story there was I very quickly realized that there is not any broadly accepted convention to something that would be accessible chemical notation. There's 2 or 3 different formats, but nothing is broadly accepted. thankfully in the math equations world, MathML is pretty broadly accepted. I won't say it's universal, but it's broad enough that I realized if you do that, you're going to reach the vast majority of folks with any kind of an assistive technology. And so, I mean, the long way of answering your question or responding to your point, Anne, is it really kind of depends on what your goal is and what you want to create, what the right ways to do that are, and then what tools and how deep you might have to go to be able to do it successfully.
Well, I think Brightspace and my own desires are either crossing, but I was hoping they were merging or forking or whichever way you want to phrase that, so that I want to choose to be on the right path. So even if I just do little steps to update things now, that in the future it could expand and be appropriate for other projects. So I'm not one into doing things 2-3 times over. So I want to make the right choices, but maybe that handicaps me a bit to not make any steps forward. So I'll keep in mind the little steps are still okay.
Yeah, I mean, I guess one of the big steps I made a couple of years ago in that world with our general chemistry lab manual, we had developed it and it was all PDFs, you know, so it all looked the same. Students could print it if they wanted. They could, but as I realized how tricky it is to make PDFs fully accessible, and the spring of 2020 and pandemic, you know, shifts and everything else, we shifted all of our general chemistry lab manual to Google Docs. And so the content is each lab experiment handout, so to speak, is a Google Doc that is completely accessible. Students can make a PDF of it if they want, but they can just view it as a Google Doc. We just link to it from whatever learning management system platform we're using, so it doesn't have to be recreated there. It also gives us the ability on the fly, if we have a newer experiment or all of a sudden we realize there's an error in it, to make the change in the Google Doc, and every single person that looks at it after the change sees the correct information. And so that was an adjustment we made a couple of years ago. And I think yes, we might sacrifice a little bit of look, of appearance in a printed document, but I think that's a good sacrifice to end up with something that is much more accessible to anyone and everyone, and gives us that flexibility of making an adjustment on the fly as needed and not having to then go and repost different file and back, and it's uniform in one place.
Well, I'll ask you actually a strategic question there. So do you guys still have the special Blackboard groups for the lab, or now that you have it all in a Google Drive, are individual lab instructors providing the link to that drive?
No, but Anna, if you want to go ahead and stop recording, we're going to probably also have to cycle out